Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session. If you are just entering into our virtual room, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're from, what organization you might rep, or you might not be here on behalf of an organization. You might just be here as a parent, which is amazing. A mother, a grandmother, father, partner. We'd love for you to just introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from. Welcome to tonight's session. We are excited to be here. This is our week of Black Maternal Mental Health Week. So we're excited just to hear from Natassia Williamson. She is our expert subject matter tonight and will give us a lot of great information. So before we get into the discussion, I want to take about 10 steps back to introduce us. So thank you all once again for joining us for Birthing the Magic Collaborative. This is a part of a wonderful series called Making Motherhood Magical, Tips and Tools for Enjoying the Journey. So as we acknowledge Black maternal health, we can think further about just all of what's possible, what's layered, how it looks, what it looks like for all of our family members as birthing people, as all of our support people. This is a great session to help kick off our week. So the sessions are all about tailoring this conversation to new and expectant mamas. The series is offering us this practical advice for emotional support, also giving us insights. And we know that tonight we're going to certainly dig into that as well. A little bit about the Birthing the Magic Collaborative. I just want to give them a shout out for having me and Natassia here this evening. Their mission is to empower, let me bring that back, empower Black birthing people with knowledge and confidence to navigate pregnancy with grace and resilience. So we love that they have us here this evening. This session is recorded. So if you miss a little bit, or if you have a friend, a colleague, a family member, you're like, oh, I wish they could get this information tonight. Don't worry, it will be recorded. It will be on Birthing the Magic's YouTube, so we'll be able to hear it again. Also, if you have any questions as we're going through, we'd love for this to be a conversation with you all tonight. So feel comfortable, leave us some questions in the chat, and we'll make some time at the end to take your questions or just hear about your experiences. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of our information to get us jump started into the conversation. Tonight, we are with Natassia. We are so excited once again to have this expert here with us. So this workshop tonight, let's go into what this is about. We're talking about gaining valuable tools and techniques to build resilience and nurture the well-being beyond those idealized visions of parenthood, right? And so I'm going to jump right into a couple of pieces about Natasha's bio. And then after that, we're going to take it away with some really great questions and really dig in deeper as we think about maternal mental health. So Natassia Williamson, she is the driving force behind Aurora Health and Wellness. She is the family nurse practitioner, certified health coach, and specialist in perinatal mental health. She is also a veteran in women-owned practice that focuses on maternal health, pregnancy wellness, and postpartum support, offering personalized and compassionate care to every patient. As a mother and living with 3 children who face postpartum anxiety, fatal loss, and unique needs with twins and feeding difficulties, Natassia brings deep empathy and understanding into her practice. So we want to give her a virtual round of applause for being here and just being so transparent with her story and just being able to share with us. I do want to say, Natassia, before we go into the next question, oh, I see the round of applause as we love it. Before we go in, I want to make sure that everybody can hear you well. So if anyone's off mute, feel free to put yourself on mute just so we can hear Natassia really well. I want to go into the first question just so we can get ourselves grounded, get ourselves started. So Natassia, just jumping off right here at the first question. To start, can you briefly share about your parenting journey, and can you just share about what that was like for you or what it is like for you? Because parenting is a journey that goes on continuously. So tell us about it.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. Well, my parenting journey started in 2015. I had my first child, and I would say the pregnancy was pretty textbook. I think I bragged too much back then. I was like, oh my goodness, my pregnancy is so great. And then he was born, and he was born with eczema, and I had never seen that. And the doctor asked me some questions, and come to find out a little bit later, he was having trouble gaining weight. And so my first experience in not having the ideal parenting experience was that I couldn't exclusively breastfeed because he was having problems gaining weight. I had to go to a special diet to try and help him gain weight. And I went soy and dairy free. That's actually really hard. And he started to gain weight, but we realized he had a lot of allergies, most of which he's outgrown as he got older. But that was the first kind of moment, like, this is not going how I envisioned it. And then in 2017, we experienced the loss of our daughter, Aurora. I went to my 20-week ultrasound, and we found out she had anencephaly, which is where part of the skull does not form completely. And in that moment, we went from thinking we were going to find out the gender to planning what a delivery and saying goodbye would look like. 2018, I had my twins. I was pregnant with my twins. And the pregnancy, again, as far as a twin pregnancy goes, it was fairly not a lot going on. There was a moments where we had to do extra testing and evaluations. However, the way she looked and was growing, according to everyone, was she's fine. They're growing great. One of them was always measured smaller, which is called intrauterine growth restriction. But we didn't know like how much smaller. It kept saying it could be a pound off here and there. And then when she was born, we realized she had low muscle tone. She couldn't eat very well. And around 5 months, she had failure to thrive and ended up with a feeding tube. So those are my experiences of how my parenting journey started.
Thank you for being, once again, transparent with your story. I'm sure many women, birthing people, and family out there can certainly relate in their own way about loss, about grief, about just dealing and doing and moving through those emotions. And that also leads us to one of our next questions, too. We know that you just mentioned in 2017, you all faced the heartbreaking loss of your daughter. And just want to think more deeply about how those challenges during that time, what you experienced, what you faced, but most importantly, for other families that are going through and they're trying to navigate, maybe even right now, how did your family cope? What were some of those coping things that maybe even brought you all closer together during that time of that heartbreaking loss? And we thank you again for just sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. I would say initially I probably didn't grieve completely. I had to continue to be a mom. And then I kept wondering, okay, when will we plan for the next one? It was one of those, I think I would say I was in denial for a while. And when we were actually going through the process, I didn't realize the hardest part for me was actually leaving the hospital. And I remember I used to work postpartum and I took a course that talked about how when we were as nurses, we would help the moms who were transitioning after having a loss. And they provide you with a memory box. And I knew all of these things was happening and was going to happen. And when I was going through it, I remember the nurse coming in with the discharge instructions. And I got up to walk to the door and I just stopped and I cried. And it took me about a good 10 minutes to regroup to even walk back down the hall. And I remember walking down the hall, there was another mom in labor. So you're watching them go through that process and then getting to the car and then leaving. So I would say I think that was the hardest part of the entire experience. And when I really started to go through the grieving process, I know I had a little denial. And I got to acceptance maybe a year later, and I finally went through that memory box and I created a shadow box for her where I had like the memories, some pictures, and just a little note. And I wanted to hang it up in our hallway, mostly because I wanted it for my twins and my other kids to be able to at least know her and know about her. So it's not a topic that we don't talk about.
It's beautiful. I'm glad that you're able to make that box. I'm sure that grieving, it comes in waves. And so I'm sure it's still a journey today, but I love how you all put that box together just as that memory, and just holding her really close to your heart. I wanted to bring up, I know that this week and this month is also Minority Mental Health Month. And as we think about maternal health and really just take down our lens a notch, we think about postpartum anxiety and depression. I was reading recently, and Marcia Dimes posted this, and they said that about 40% or over 40% of Black moms and birthing people face these different challenges around mental health, whether during pregnancy, after pregnancy, and postpartum. And of course, we also have to think about moms that are having trouble giving birth to, or those who are having trouble conceiving, rather, with infertility. So I wanted to ask, with postpartum anxiety and with it being a significant challenge for many parents, can you share how your experience with postpartum anxiety was and how did you manage it? How did you come to manage it?
I am definitely a warrior. So managing my postpartum anxiety, I didn't even know I had postpartum anxiety with my son. It wasn't until I found the PMH-C course where I'm certified in perinatal mental health and I started going through it and reading a lot of the symptoms of postpartum anxiety. I realized I was like, that was me. And I didn't realize like a lot of the things I was doing. Like for one, I think what contributed to it was because my son wasn't gaining weight. So now I'm here, I'm trying to breastfeed. My thought was to exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. I had all these plans and it wasn't going the way I wanted. And then I'm constantly going in for weight checks and just when you leave an appointment and they're like, well, they're not gaining as much as we like. You need to do this, you need to do that. And also trying to be on a diet, soy and dairy free, which I've learned from other lactation consultants and other healthcare professionals that that's not necessarily always the solution. So I think back then I was just first time mom experiencing a lot of worry about him not gaining weight, about my plan not going how I wanted. And I remember reading a lot. And around 4 or 5 months, I just put everything down and I stopped reading. I was like, nope, I'm not going to read anything else. I'm just going to go with what I think and feel is right and come up with that. I did find a resource that helped a lot. That was the Wonder Weeks, and it was one of those quick graphs that I would look at. I'm like, he seems a little bit more fussy. Um, so let me see. And it was always during a developmental milestone. And so it helped me kind of put into place what was going on with him developmentally. And so then that way I could kind of tailor our days and things like that and help with his scheduling.
Wow, thank you for putting that resource out there. I said this during one of our last webinars for Birthing the Magic, but we have to have this really robust resource list. That's a great one. Thank you for sharing that. And it helps to like frame where your child might be at, it sounds like, as they move through development. I wanted to ask and maybe go back and backtrack for a second. So with postpartum anxiety, you said that you went through, you're looking at the training. um, what are some of those signs that women and birthing people can look out for to kind of note that, oh, this might be me. I might be facing postpartum anxiety right now. What should they look out for?
Increased worrying. I was at a speak the other day, and one of the providers was saying the what ifs. And when she said it, I laughed because I'm a big what if person. I can what if until the cows come home. What if this? So what if that? And then someone would give me a solution. I'm like, what if that didn't? And so that made perfect sense to me. Like, what if was a lot of the things that went through my mind. Sleep differences, being excessively sleepy or being so anxious that you can't relax, so you're not able to fall asleep, but you're tired. Um, Sometimes you can have suicidal thoughts, or not necessarily you're going to carrying it out. It's just, I think maybe my baby might be better off without me. Intrusive thoughts. Will Will I fall down the stairs and drop my baby? So I don't want to carry the baby up and down the stairs. Feeling isolated, not feeling like anyone understands you. So those are some of the symptoms I would say with postpartum anxiety.
Yeah, I'm taking even further a detour from our regular scheduled questions, but Natasha, for someone who is there, they're like, okay, that sounds like me. What should be their next step? I know like we have medical professionals out there that they could perhaps reach out to, or any type of support groups. What would you say might be some different ways that they can go, or some different avenues?
Definitely reaching out to either if you have a primary care provider, reaching out to them. You could also reach out to your OBGYN, at least to get in initially and talk to them about it. If you're feeling that way a little bit before your first follow up with your OB, you could reach out to a therapist, mental health professional. Postpartum Support International is another resource that has tons of information. That's the certifying body of who the PMH-C is through. So they have support groups online, they have helplines. There's a lot of resources out there, but first and foremost, definitely identifying that you're even having those symptoms and then finding support.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So jumping back in, I want to know, you mentioned I mentioned in your bio as I was reading, and it's so impressive all the things that you've done and accomplished and all that's to come. But right now in your life, how did you balance demanding career as a nurse, both as an army, as a civilian at the same time, and then also being a parent. Can you tell us all about the balance and how you work that out for yourself and your family?
I think we're still balancing it. But I wasn't in the military when I had kids, so I would say that was probably the easiest part was being civilian. And for me, I don't know why, but both pregnancies, my first and my third one, was at a point of a career change. Well, not a career change, but a job change. So when I was pregnant with my son, I left one job for another, and it was deciding when to tell my boss, how do I plan my maternity leave? What does that look like since I don't qualify for FMLA and all the other benefits because I hadn't been there so long? And then when I did the same thing, somehow when I got pregnant with my twins, it was another job transition. And it was telling my boss again that I was pregnant. And this time I'm telling her I'm pregnant with twins. And we're sitting in the office. I remember she's like, okay, so when are you due? And I was like, I'm due in December. And she was like, well, November, you'll be off. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. I said, but they're twins. And she was like, oh, so you're leaving in August? I'm like, no, I'm not leaving in August. I'm making it further than that. And so I would say that was different as far as not knowing what it would look like with those benefits and the constant worrying, like, well, I know they can't technically fire me, but it's a possibility that I could come back afterwards and not have a job. And when we had my twins, that was another balancing act because I stayed working full time and my husband became a stay-at-home dad. And it was weird because I'm the medical professional, but he's the one at home doing the feeding tubes with the baby. And so I think for us, it's always been kind of looking at the overall picture, what is the best benefit for the family, and how we're going to make it look.
Absolutely. Like you said, still working on it, a work in progress, but it sounds like it's working great. So that's wonderful to hear about the different roles of you and your partner and how that is all working out great. We wanted to say, so with mental health, we know that there are so many different layers. We're thinking about parenting, we're thinking about our jobs, who we are, making sure that none of that gets lost. And I think that during the pandemic, probably more than ever, we talked about taking care of self and what that looks like, and just really paying attention to our mental health and what that care looks like. So, for the next question, we wanted to ask, how do you take care of your mental health while fulfilling this role? How do you lean into that self care? I think that's a challenge for so many parents. And so, how do you do that?
I like to do things. I know that for me, I went to one therapist told me to find a hobby. And when she said that, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, what is that? I'm here talking to you about my issues. And you telling me to get a hobby. That um sounds like you're just wanting me to go do something. And I remember leaving that office and I was like, okay, I'm gonna find a hobby. And I went and Googled hobbies and it was like bike riding. I was like, no, not for me. And it was like candle making. I tried it. I was like, not for me. And then I realized for me, it was writing. So writing was my therapy. And so I got back into that. I wrote a children's book, which helped a lot of my journey personally and professionally as far as the book. I used that as a catalyst to get me to get more physical. When I was writing a book, my husband illustrated the book and we made a bet. And I was like, for every day I work out, you have to draw me a picture for my book. And it was one of those that was the catalyst to me getting physical and physically active and improving my health, which ultimately helped improve my mental health as well. Meditating helped me with my anxiety as far as trying to learn the thoughts and acknowledge them instead of letting them run on autopilot. And it's like all of these thoughts are going on in your head and you don't even realize that they're going on, and you don't realize how much impact it has on your physical health. Having a lot of chronic stomach issues and pain and hip pain. And as I started to exercise and improve my nutrition and improve my mental health, those symptoms started to subside, and there was no real medical diagnosis to my pains. It was just I was holding a lot of stress in. I had a lot of weight on me, so it was me just focusing on myself in order for me to be better for my kids and whatever that looked like. And so I found a hobby, I started writing, I went to therapy, I leaned in on my husband, who's my life coach. I always tell people that's my life coach. I got lucky because whenever I'm like needing some advice or guidance, and he's right there and always has some of the same, or he'll tell me what I already know, and it's just reframing it. So I'm like, okay, let me get back on track.
I love that. You gave us a nice package right there, a nice kit of self-care from, that journaling and writing. You have to tell us more about the book. I'm gonna plug that in somewhere, like right now, probably, but we have to learn more about the book. Also, like having someone to talk to, having your village, right? Where you could have that conversation with your life coach, your partner, the movement, the eating well. Thank you for just giving us the different layers. So I will say that. Tell us about your book now. I want to learn more, and I'm sure our audience wants to hear about it too. Can you please tell us about what it looks like, the illustrations, who's it for? I know a little bit of the things, but tell us all what's going on.
Yes. So ABCD is ability, getting to know kids with disabilities. It is an alphabet book. And I went through and researched different alphabet letters, different diagnoses for each letter of the alphabet, and created characters around those diagnoses. And it was to highlight some of the information about a disability, but also I wanted to create characters who talked about some of the things that they really enjoyed doing. I have like letter B is for blindness, and my kid, he talks about learning Braille and that he uses a walking stick, and he also loves to swim, and he uses the rope guides to help him stay in his lane. And so things that I didn't realize when I was writing the book, there was a diagnosis I had never even heard of. So I learned about it, those things. And then I also learned how can one with certain disabilities still be physically active or engage in some of the activities that kids without those disabilities can engage in. And so the purpose of the book is to educate children about disabilities, but also promoting inclusion and acceptance and opening that dialogue between families so that they can talk about what a person with a disability look like. And I also talk about some of the disabilities that aren't seen. So some of those disabilities are you don't know someone may have a disability, but based on the definition of disability, it impacts their quality of life, but you wouldn't know, like, if someone had, like, juvenile diabetes is one of my diagnoses, so she talks about using her insulin pump. For me, like I said, that was therapy. It was during the time where my daughter was having a lot of feeding difficulties, and I just really wanted to go into her appointments knowing what I saw with her and being able to kind of direct her plan of care, or at least bring her team in on some of the symptoms and things that I was noticing. So for me, it was like, I'm trying to really diagnose her and figure out what she might have that could be causing this. But I'm also realizing that this could be a great tool for families to use.
A great tool. It is. I know I'm gonna get that book. Thank you. I think Marie put that in the chat for us. I saw a lot of hearts. I'm seeing them now popping up for the book. And so that is something that is certainly needed for all of us and in our community as well. So thank you so much for going off on a little bit of a detour with me there. I had to get that in. Okay. So getting back on track again. We just talked about village and how important it is to have your tribe, right? And so how important for you was it to have your support system in place when you're dealing with unexpected parenting challenges? Can you tell us more about that? And also, I want to add a little bit more to that, if you don't mind. for parents that are going through mental health challenges or postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, what are some things that family and village can do also to support that individual, and just lean in a little bit more that, our support people might need to know?
I would say the importance of support. I did not value that as much as I do now. My support system has been ever growing. Just I remember the first time I think I really needed a mental health support system is when I was going through uh, deciding what to do with my daughter. We went to her initial appointment. Like I said, she was diagnosed with anencephaly, and the doctor was like, "Okay, let's schedule your induction." And I was like, "Pause, pump the brakes. I don't even know if I really like. What do I want to do with this? She's 20 weeks." And even though I knew that the outcome, whether we delivered now or delivered at term, she wouldn't survive. But I had to make the decision: do I want to continue on with this pregnancy, knowing the risk of to me that could happen and knowing that the outcome is going to be the same either way. But I didn't want to make that decision that weekend. And what I asked for was, can I come back and do another ultrasound? And he said yes. And that was just me getting confirmation that you saw what you said you saw. Like I know you say you saw it and I trust that you saw it, but I just wanted that additional confirmation and I wanted to decide when and how the delivery would look. And for me, that was so I went and jumped on Facebook and found a Facebook group for anencephaly. And I realized that within the first couple hours, I was in the wrong group. So that group was initially for families who were carrying to term. And I remember seeing a lady wrote a question and she was like, "I'm going to deliver early." Um, and they were like, "This group isn't for you. You're," and it was very harsh. And so I realized, and they did mention the right group to go to. So I went to that group. And I just read a lot of people's experiences and I didn't share my story on that platform. But for me, it was just I wanted to see what other people said and experienced, and that made me more comfortable with going ahead and delivering early. And I remember like my work with postpartum, they talked about, well, you can see the baby after, you can hold the baby for hours, however long you want to be with them. So then it was going through that thought process. Well, how long do I want to hold her? Do I want to hold her? What do I want to do? And I think that was the first time I really realized that external support was needed. And then when I had my twins, I joined a twin mom group, and I joined it late. I joined them around age 3. I was like, I wish I would have joined y'all 3 years ago. But even now to this day, I there's a lot of experiences that they can relate to. My husband has been another support system. My mom has been a support system with watching the kids when we need for work, when we need just time alone for us. So definitely lean into support groups, however that looks for you.
Thank you so much. And I keep seeing the chat light up. I know a lot of folks can certainly resonate with what you mentioned, and it's so good to have that support, whether folks are in person and there with you or that virtual side. And we love a good support group. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to jump to what are some of the key lessons or those key takeaways that you learned during your parenting journey, that you'd like to share with other parents today? You already dropped some really great information with us, but is there anything else that you would like to share with those parents out there that want to know more?
I would say being present over being perfect. Um, I'd say I'm a recovering procrastinating perfectionist. I thought I coined that term, and then I started seeing other people on the internet saying the same thing. I was like, no, there's not more of us, but there is. It's one of those like you want it to be so perfect that you either freeze and do nothing, or you wait to the last minute. And being a perfect parent doesn't exist. And then even going through and healing from your own childhood traumas or experiences or beliefs of what you thought parenting was going to be like and then what it really ends up being. So going through the stages of grief, understanding that that's a process in itself. We can go through the entire stage, but and you can recycle back through those stages when something new presents. As far as with my son, I remember having a lot of uh, guilt that I didn't breastfeed until a year and that I didn't exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. And I go back through that and I have to tell myself, you did good. I took a course, the Black lactation course, a few months ago. And one of the lactation consultants, she didn't know this, but at the time she was healing me through some of my guilt that I was holding on to. And she said, if you breastfed, even if you pump, you breastfed. You and so for me, it was just validating that experience that you didn't do it the way you wanted to, but you still did it. So there's a lot of things in parenting that there's things you will want to do as a parent and you may not be able to experience that. And you have to know that those cycles of realizations may cycle you back through those stages of grief and you may be like, I thought I dealt with this, and then you're like, no, I'm crying all over, I'm looking a mess, this was something that happened 3 years ago, why am I feeling this way? So understanding that things will trigger you and it's normal to keep going through these stages of healing. Self-care, self-care, self-care. I can't stress that enough. And whatever that looks like for you, finding things that you don't lose yourself in being a mom and a spouse and an employee and all of the hats and the things that we do every day and neglecting the stuff that is clipping your toenails can be self-care. I know that sounded really, but it's those things like you might just really have things that you are neglecting in yourself and you're not doing, giving yourself a facial. And some people say the aesthetic part isn't necessarily self-care, but if it's something that you used to do and you're not doing it anymore, how does that affect you?
Yes, you can't hear me on my side. I had the mute on, but I said, that was a good statement to leave that one on. I appreciate what you mentioned about not seeking that perfection, but just being the best parent and you being a parent, everyone that's here with us that are parents or godparents, sister, brother, mother, you know who you are, that everyone plays a role. And so just leaning into being the best that you can, and not looking for perfection because we get wrapped up in thinking about that. I'm so glad that you mentioned breastfeeding or chest feeding as well. I know that's going to be a lot of our next month conversation as it is going to be Black Maternal Breastfeeding Week or Black Breastfeeding Week at the end of August. But you brought up some really great points there about guilt that can come about and just knowing that however your baby is fed, that's the best way, you know? And so thank you so much for sharing that too. So you dropped some information on us. We love it. I see that our audience is lighting up, and so I want to take a moment just to go there. Does anyone have any questions for Natassia that she can answer tonight? I'm gonna look and see if there's anything that we might have missed. Marie, I might need your help too, just to get me acclimated here to the chat. But if you have any questions, you could also come off of mute. We would love to hear you too virtually. And we have a lot here to go through. A lot of folks just really chiming in. Yeah, someone said, and this is a little bit a few minutes earlier, that sometimes just being, just take to be capital letters is self-care. I love that. Thank you so much for saying that. Yes. So as we're going through and I'm letting people allowing some time to type out your question. Sometimes I have my question, but it's like I have to engineer it in the chat a little bit. So take your time. Feel free to type it out, those who are with us tonight. Natassia, I want to lean more into finding out about Aurora Health. Can you tell us more about that? I know that was like a little bit of our bio highlight, but I would like to learn more. And once again, I think our audience would love to hear it too.
Yes, Aurora Health and Wellness, also known as Aurora Maternal and Family Health Care. We are a primary care service, so we do primary care for adults and pediatrics, pregnancy wellness coaching for postpartum support, and then helping families with concerns about developmental delays and disabilities navigate the healthcare system. For me, the most challenging thing was being a patient or actually being an advocate for my daughter. I I had patients tell me how difficult it is to navigate the healthcare system when I send them to specialists and they come back and I'm telling them, "Hey, you should get this checked out." And then they come back and it's like, "Well, I don't think they heard me. I don't think they were listening." And I remember this going through it with my daughter. I'm like, "Hey, do you think she needs a feeding tube? Do you think she needs a feeding tube?" And they're like, "No, no." And she's not gaining weight. She's not eating well. I couldn't feed her. I literally could not feed the girl. And it was like 2 ounces that they were trying to get her to eat. My husband was the only one that could, but then it got to a point where it was stressful for him and her. And I remember going to one of her specialists and he was like, "Well, I've never met a baby that didn't know how to survive." And I'm like, "Well, exhibit A, because she doesn't cry to eat. She doesn't cry when she's wet. She refuses the bottle." And when the weekend they finally said, "Okay, we'll get her in to get a feeding tube." And it wasn't a permanent or a surgical feeding tube, it was a nasogastric tube. So it went through the nose to her stomach. And I remember that whole weekend I was so like just worried because her eating slowed even more. So then when we get to the hospital, they see this baby and then all of a sudden it feels like there's alarms going on and all these people coming in. "Well, how did long did you notice this? And why is this baby looking like this?" And I'm like, "We've been going to her appointments very regularly and I've been stressing the need for a feeding tube." And they started doing all the tests, MRIs, and just seeing if there was brain damage or what was causing her not to be able to eat. And everything was coming back normal. It's just she was born with low muscle tone. So she didn't have the muscle control to be able to suck and swallow. And when she got her feeding tube, that weekend she got it, she lifted her head up for the first time after about being on it for a day. So you could tell that she was just needing that nutrients to survive. And for me, that's what really started my journey into holistic healthcare. Personally, I realized, like it was mentioned earlier, somatic um, presentation is real. And so when you are not mentally all the way well, physically you can be having symptoms and vice versa. If you have high blood pressure, some of it could be contributing to external factors, stress, as well as internal factors, you're not exercising and things like that. So for me, it was helping families realize that your whole body is a system. Everything works together. And if one thing is off, everything could be off. And then helping families navigate this system that is complex if you don't have the knowledge to begin with medical terminology in itself. So it's for me to help families when they're managing their own chronic conditions or if they're just coming in for an annual physical and want to talk or going through pregnancy and they don't want to have the traditional home birth, I mean, a traditional hospital birth, helping them find resources that allow them to have the birth that they want and then navigating the postpartum period.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you do. The last words that you just mentioned stuck with me, allowing families to have the birth that they want. That's beautiful. And so appreciate it. And I think we're seeing that reflected in the hearts that we're getting, the thumbs up in the chat. Still leaving it open for anyone that has questions, but I have one more as we kind of get a little bit closer to closing. Just a moment ago, you talked about that advocacy component and still like pressing and having to share with multiple providers about what was going on. And so I want to ask for parents out there that are trying to navigate and they're like, well, how can I advocate for my child? Like, what are some of the best ways? How do I prepare for that? Maybe it's a NICU parent or just really any parent. We all have to advocate for our children at some point, right? But can you just share more about that advocacy and like any tips that you have around that?
I would say initially your biggest thing would be making note of what is going on, what you're noticing. Write it down so that when you go in to speak with your provider, you may not know the words or what it's called, but you're noticing some behaviors, some symptoms. Write down how often it happens. Write down when you first noticed it, like the very first time you noticed it. And then again, how often, um, what your baby might be doing before and after whatever your symptoms you're noticing. Um, and then just being able to articulate that and say what you're seeing. And then seek help. If you are going to your provider and they're not listening, I'm all for saying fire them and find another one. But if it's a misunderstanding or something that y'all can work through, maybe you need someone to come in and help. So looking for an advocate or someone in the community that could come in with you to your appointments to kind of help be a guide or someone who knows a little bit more than what you are or can help structure those conversations with your provider. But you are your biggest advocate. You have all the information. So I know one of the things that always happens is patients come in and they forget the question that they were going to ask me, and it was a very pressing one, and it's been 4 weeks since they saw me and they really want to ask this question and they don't remember it. So the main thing is writing it down, put it in your phone. If you always carry your phone, put a note in there so that you can just, even if you're just like rambling off like a list of stuff, and then we can work through it and go back and be like, okay, so you notice she's not eating, and you notice that after she eats she throws up, and you're noticing, so a lot of those things, that symptoms that you might forget. It might be something that you've seen one time, but it could be a very significant um, symptom and you're just not realizing it. So definitely seek help, ask questions, and being able to articulate what is going on.
That's wonderful insight. Continuing to ask those questions, find a provider that's listening. So that second, third, fourth opinion, if you have to. Just like you mentioned, writing it down, I think is a huge, huge tool. Just having those questions prepared can certainly help with that advocacy piece. And depending upon where you're at with pregnancy or postpartum or even loss, there's doulas that are available, perhaps even some CHWs or community health workers that could help to really amplify your voice or to be there in the room with you, or of course your tribe, friends, and family that are around as well. I saw that, Marie. I saw your hand went up. You have a question for Natasha? All right. Well, I keep seeing the same thing. I know I'm saying it again, but I hear that in the chat. I'm just reading out loud that everyone's so thankful for you sharing your journey tonight, Natasha, that you're amazing. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
sharing your journey. These are the really great comments and responses that we got, and we are so appreciative for having everyone here to pull up to this conversation, to be a part of it. Because as I mentioned, I know a lot of us can certainly relate to what you shared. So as we get ready to close out tonight, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in before we do. But before we jump out and close out, Natasha, just anything else that you want to leave us with, feel free to leave your information too for Aurora Health and Family Wellness, just so we know we have our information in our tool belt, if you will. I'll leave some information too, because I forgot to introduce myself at the top of this presentation. I was so excited to talk to you. But Natasha, I wanna give the mic right over to you if you have anything before we get ready to close out tonight.
No, the only thing I would say is definitely you're not alone in this journey. There's going to always be someone that has similar experiences. And also use resources, like you said, reaching out to like doulas. And I also want to encourage people, if you have insurance, your insurance is a really good resource. You can call them. They have advocacy programs through insurances, and a lot of people don't know that. So if you call your insurance and say you need maybe a case manager to kind of help coordinate your plan because you don't know where to go next, and maybe your primary care provider you haven't got in to see them yet, or they're kind of dragging their feet on your concerns, you can find a case manager to help with those resources and finding additional specialists that maybe you need. So that's another resource I want people to know, is that your insurance, yes, may be hard to navigate. You may not understand your copays and all of those things, but they do have additional resources and services to help facilitate some of your care. And if you are looking for a primary care provider in Arizona, Aurora Maternal and Family Health, we are always taking new patients. You can find us on Instagram, Bottles, Boobs, and Feeding Tubes. We are also on TikTok, mp.t.aurora family health, and YouTube, Bottles, Boobs, and Feeding Tubes.
Wait, you have to say the YouTube channel again.
Bottles, Boobs, and Feeding Tubes.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing that wisdom. Everyone, as I did mention, this will be on YouTube via Birthing the Magic. So look for it to be posted. All of the great resources that have been given tonight. Natassia, we thank you for your story that you've shared. And just the different levels as you continue to parent, and really giving us a lot of information to think about with mental health, with postpartum. How do we navigate? What do we do? Self-care, paying attention to ourselves. You certainly have given us a lot to just think about and also to share with others tonight. I want to also say that this is one day of a beautiful series that Birth in the Magic has put on. This is day one, so get ready for the rest of it. You can go and find the other sessions that are offered. I think we have another session tomorrow at 12. So we'll put some information in the chat if you're interested in registering for the week of beautiful sessions as we continue to celebrate, uplift, and draw awareness around Black maternal mental health. I didn't say it earlier, but I'm Christine Ivory. I am the public health John. I'm also a program officer at the New Jersey Healthcare Quality Institute. And I'm going to leave my information in the chat too for any consulting or coaching needs around public health and maternal health. And Natassia, we thank you so much for being here tonight. We'll have your information ready for everyone. And everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.